Everyone, I'm Matt, and welcome to the Good Trouble Show. Our next guest is covering the UFO beat with the rigor of the Washington Post reporters that broke Watergate. Please welcome from across the pond our good friend Chris Sharp.
Hey, brother, how's it going? Good to see you.
Good to see you too. How's the weather in London?
Cold, bloody cold. Yeah, It's February. It's the most terrible month, and I'm looking forward to going on a holiday soon to Spain, so I can escape and have some sunshine and blue skies and stuff. Yeah, and warmth, mostly
Nice.
warmth.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so I have to ask, have you seen any Chinese balloons floating over London yet?
No, unfortunately not. The most famous balloon I think we had in London, the last I remember, was the Donald Trump balloon that you hilariously captured, I believe, yesterday. I mean, I try to keep things by bath time, but it was quite hilarious when that happened. I think they
Yeah, we had a good bit of fun with that. Yeah, with our newly found NORAD close-ups of the Chinese balloon. So okay, so let's see here. So let's talk about UAPs. So you've been covering the UFO beat for the Liberation Times and the Daily Mail, right?
That's correct. Yes, Daily Mail and Liberation Times, correct.
So so not everybody covers this kind of stuff. A lot of reporters, it's, about, pop culture or politics or whatever, that kind of stuff. What made you decide I'm going to cover UFOs, or what are also referred to as UAPs? What was your motivation, or what kind of, how'd you just wake up one day and said, this is interesting, I want to cover it?
It's quite a long story, but I'll try to shorten it as much as possible. So I think when I was a child, I was just interested in that kind of stuff. They asked you to write a short story for school, and I'd do something about UFOs or something like that. And then as I grew up, I started watching all the documentaries on History Channel and Discovery. And it was just always something that captivated me. And then I guess as I started my professional career, I kind of lost interest, and my everyday life was very materialistic and detailed. It was about property, public relations, and doing politics and public affairs alongside that. And I mean, no one in that industry is going to have any time for that stuff, especially people from Oxbridge and stuff like that, who are dealing with politics and all the minutiae and stuff. So. I guess when the pandemic hit, I remember I was like laying on the bed with COVID, and I was struggling to breathe. Like, never in my life before have I struggled to breathe, which was pretty scary. And I think that was like around the same time when Pentagon actually it released the videos, the three videos, I believe, that were previously released to the Stars Academy. On the UAPs that were witnessed and captured, and I was like, "Gosh, this is real," and it kind of like it really synced in with me, and coming from a place of despair where I thought the whole world was gonna end up in a horrible place, and I might even end up in hospital. That gave me kind of like hope. There's something extraordinary happening. So that reignited my interest, along with like the Corbell interview with Lazar and other things like that. And I guess what happened, I mean, I was finding childcare really difficult with my wife being a nurse. So eventually I just quit my job in public relations, and I found myself quite bored and just didn't really have much to do. So I just started a Squarespace website, and I thought, yeah, let's start my own news website. And it was going to be like much broader than UFOs to begin with. But then I guess I just found my niche, and it just kept on evolving. Yeah.
So when you were envisioning Liberation Times, what other things were you thinking about doing besides the UAP beat?
Well, what I really find interesting is kind of like how sources can define a story. This is something I did for my dissertation at university. So if during a conflict situation, if you're like, let's say in Israel, for example, if you're embedded in Israel, all you're going to get is like Israeli government sources feeding you the information, and they're your port of call. And then you're never really going to develop the sources with the Palestinians, for example. So your story is always going to be swayed a certain way, and vice versa as well. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to kind of like create, I had a vision of something where I report on news stories that, were big news stories at the time, like, the US withdrawing from Afghanistan. And then I would kind of make it clear in terms of pointing out the facts and what sources are being used. I don't think I ever quite got there, but that was some kind of vision that I may revisit again at some point. But yeah, that's something I've always found quite interesting. And then yeah, as I said, I just found my niche in UFOs, and I was already involved in UFO Twitter. It just came from there really, and my anger at the US government when it comes to this.
Right. Yeah. The landscape on UFO Twitter is kind of like the Wild West, I'd say. It's definitely interesting. So what was your first UAP article that you wrote? And was this for the Liberation Times?
Yeah, it was for Liberation Times. I think, and no, actually, I think it was something along the lines of, I did some multiple ones over one day, I think, and I think one of them was around, I found a report on US UFO sightings and what states had the most common occurrence of sightings. And what I did an article on that and regurgitated a few things, and also I kind of like broke it down per capita as well in terms of how many sightings there were to give a better picture in terms of how often they're being cited. And yeah, just something really, really boring like that, I think.
Was this a number of UAPs in a state here in America, or?
Yeah, in America, yeah.
And what was the state that won the award for that?
My memory is not great. Apologies.
That's okay. Yeah, I don't mean to put you on the spot there.
Yeah, I think it was like Vermont. I think if you looked at it in terms of like the overall number, like you're going to get California on top, which is disproportionately represented due to the population. But I think when you break it down, I think it was like something small like Vermont.
Okay, wow.
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
But it wasn't really journalism. It was just like regurgitating stuff and breaking things down. As I said, it really, really did evolve.
So what's your personal opinion? Is this whole UFO thing real? Are UFOs real?
Yeah, of course they're real, because the US government has now established that as facts, and there are things called unidentified flying objects. It doesn't mean they're alien or non-human intelligence. It means that they're unidentified until they're identified. But there are some identified flying objects that have very, very, let's say, laws of physics defying capabilities, which are the most interesting UFOs that we're not able to kind of put a label on. And those are the really important ones, which the US government has kind of established as well. And the most recent reports from ARROW, which is the UFO office within the US government.
So one thing that you hear from some of the skeptics is that what you're really seeing are, let's say, drones from China, a balloon from China, or it could be like some kind of hypersonic weapon from Russia or China. What in your opinion sort of is the argument against that?
I think you just have to really balance it out. I mean, there are unidentified aerial phenomena which may be balloon-like entities and drones, which is admitted in a UAP report. Although those are initial characterizations, which is very, very important when it comes down to this stuff. Um, but that's true, and that's very, very important as well, because you have to identify anything that may be, Chinese surveillance over your skies, as we do with China as well, in the UK, and with Russia as well. Because if you can get something that high, I mean, balloons, they're not easy and straightforward to shoot down. And if you can and if they're being ignored, if China wants to do something devastating,
Right.
it could from those, it can have some kind of payload. So that's really, really important to identify all UFOs and keep track of them and identify them if we can, positively identify them in terms of the location they're coming from, the origin, and the operators as well. So that's really important, firstly. And obviously that's a real concern that we know about. And I think in terms of, let's say, the aspect that may label them as kind of like non-human, well, this is just kind of like where we're at the moment in terms of, I mean, the former director of national intelligence, John Radcliffe, basically said that these things seem to defy the laws of physics. And I mean, we're talking transmedium craft that allegedly come from space,
And
perhaps
what,
deep space.
and what is, I've heard this term a bunch of times. What exactly does transmedium mean?
Yeah, the ability to travel from space to within our atmosphere, within the air, and then into the sea. So it's kind of like undersea and aerospace, really. And they can enter the ocean without creating a splash. And they don't have
Wow.
any apparent kind of like flying um, they don't have any kind of like dynamics. They don't have any wings and stuff like that. Some of them are spheres, some of them are triangles, allegedly pyramids as well. They don't make a noise. They hover. There's some really, really strange characteristics, and the speeds they travel at as well exceed anything that we're capable of doing. But some people may say, "Oh, it's hypersonic missile," but I mean, we're talking about something that can travel at hypersonic speeds and then just take a immediate left-hand turn
Right.
on whim. So we're talking about that, really. And the US officials have basically said, look, we don't have this technology. We don't understand this technology. And I mean, yeah, it's the US government in its own way, in terms of bureaucracy, tries to downplay these things with bureaucratic language, like unusual flight characteristics, for instance. But this stuff, when we say unusual flight characteristics, it's fundamentally extraordinary from all accounts. And this isn't just eyewitness testimony; it's been captured on multiple sensor systems as well. So it's extraordinary stuff. And look, we just don't know whose technology this is. If it is Chinese technology, then we have every reason to worry. Not just the United States, but my country as well, because all of a sudden you've got yourself a very, very authoritarian country with an awful human rights record,
Right.
which is basically the dominant power in the world. And as much as we can criticize every country in the world when it comes to their records, I think China has a very, very bad record currently in terms of what it's doing. So yeah.
And these things are definitely not seagulls.
That's very funny. No. I mean, on some occurrences, yeah, they could be seagulls but I mean, those cases, I would feel would get dismissed straight away once they go through analytical processes. like the latest kind of um, intelligence kind of summary on UAP basically says from the intelligence committee is that if they're identified, then they're no longer UAP. So, but
Right.
we can't rule out anything. But I
Sure.
think the chances of that are very, very minimalistic when we're talking about the extraordinary technology that um, has been demonstrated by these things. And it's not just one group led by Lue Elizondo, who is the person who kind of spoke out about this and was working on a UFO program in the US before coming out to the New York Times. It's not just him. I mean, you're talking about people that don't speak to each other, people who don't know each other, all saying the same thing, from former Trump staffers to current senators, representatives, and just all sorts of people from various backgrounds who do have some insight on what's going on.
Yeah, I want to kind of go back to a comment that when we were talking about uh, one thing that people will say, oh, it's a hypersonic technology. So as you noted, these things do move at hypersonic velocities. However, what hypersonic strategic weapons, hypersonic warheads, what they don't do is stop on a dime and turn. They're maneuverable. They can change their course, but it's more over like an arc rather than just instantaneously stop and change direction. That we do not have anything like that, nor do I believe any country on earth has it. It's
Yeah, and the water as well. Travel
sorry,
through
say it
water.
again.
And travel through water as well. I doubt hypersonic missiles can do that.
Right. Yeah, so one of the things that I've heard is that, well, like for instance, let's say an aircraft carrier. I'm guessing the max speed that thing can go above water is probably 50 knots. A submarine, I'm guessing, is maybe a little bit more. I've heard that some Russian torpedoes that are supercavitating can go around 120 knots, which is extremely, extremely fast. That's like that'd be about the speed of a general aviation airplane going through the air. Now, one of the things that I've heard through the grapevine is that our submarine people our men and women on submarines have clocked these things on sonar going several hundred knots underwater, which is just completely mind blowing.
Yeah, correct. And these things have allegedly been seen, I say allegedly, coming out of the water. I mean, this instance I'm talking about is apparently a triangular craft, size of the football pitch,
Wow.
coming out of the ocean, and then taking off vertically, going into into space, basically. So I'd love to see one of those torpedoes if they exist.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then another important point. So you've got this video game developer, Mick West, who also moonlights as a UFO debunker, and and I know some things he has sort of provided a good case against certain events that maybe had a more prosaic explanation, but but I think that the thing to kind of keep in mind is all of these things that are coming in from our military. For instance, people operating F-18 Hornets, naval pilots. These professional aviators, these professional airmen and women, the government, whichever government may be, United Kingdom, United States, other countries, these countries spend millions of dollars training these professionals to operate vehicles that cost hundreds of millions of dollars. So, these folks, they're so highly trained. They're trained to identify a MiG fighter from X number of miles away just by their silhouette. So, all of these reports that are coming in, it's not like my mom driving her car and seeing something. Not to discount people that see this stuff every day. or from every walk of life, but these military folks that are seeing them, these are highly trained individuals.
Correct. Yes. I mean, the skeptic and debunker's perspective will be to look through FOIAs and kind of like look at the video and try to find prosaic answers. And I mean, they on their own, they seem perfectly reasonable, except from they like to ignore the testimony of the witnesses. That's what they depend upon, or claiming that those trained observers are making a mistake. It all depends on that, and the Pentagon certainly doesn't help either, because there's limited information that's released in terms of videos and video lengths, and reports relating to these things, and showing what's coming up on the sensor systems. So it kind of like the lack of information kind of feeds these debunkers to fill in the gaps with their own opinions, basically, based on their bias. Experiment and analysis, which is really disappointing. It's just very disappointing that these witnesses have come forward at great cost to their careers, and they're just kind of like poo-pooed by them, and for people to claim that they're making mistakes and stuff like that, like Mick West, or that they're wrong. It's really, really disappointing to see. I mean, that's yeah. As I said, the basis of all this is just to ignore the eyewitnesses who are actually there and saw these things.
Okay, so kind of one big thing that has happened over the past couple of years is all of this legislation that Congress in the United States has put into effect to sort of force a conversation with the DoD about the existence of UAPs. Now, actually, back up a little bit. So these laws have gone into what's called the National Defense Authorization Act. So people in Congress put up legislation regarding UAPs, and they put it in this National Defense Authorization Act, which becomes law and is part of what funds the Pentagon. So without going into a huge amount of detail, just kind of explain to the general public that's not familiar with the NDAA or these new UFO laws, what has happened in past couple of years in America with these new UAP laws.
Yeah, sure. So I believe it was the NDAA, or I think it was the Intelligence Authorization Act, in fact, of 2020, which established the UAP task force, and it created created a purpose for it to draft and publish a report through the ODNI. So it started with there, although the UAP task force already existed before then, which is its own story. And then you had a report back in, I believe it was June 2021, and that basically, I mean, I think it was the vast majority, but one or two cases were actually unidentified, that they couldn't identify them, and it spoke about signature management and unusual flight characteristics and stuff like that. So that was a really, really big one. I mean, it really moved the ball forwards in terms of UAP existing, but not only that, but them appearing over like test ranges and stuff, and for the US military. So then following on from that, there was, because that was just a task force, it was only supposed to be temporary. So then there was a demand to create something more permanent, like an office. So then after that, AOIMSG, don't even ask me to tell you what it stands for again, but it was like the replacement of the UAP task force.
The government loves acronyms, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was a UFO office, I should say.
Right,
it was created it was created by Hicks, Kathleen Hicks, Deputy Secretary of Defense and Avril Haines, DNI. Although it's very, very important to state that the UAP task force was established by Trump, his government, which shows this is kind of like transcends normal politics. So that was created, the IMSG. But I mean, it was very, and there was like a requirement to kind of be more transparent, go over information about where UAP is being seen over nuclear sites and stuff. The report basically had to do a yearly annual public report, similar to the UAPTF report, but there were much more demands in terms of that report and the information that would contain. But as I reported, because that UFO office was located within OUSDINS, the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence Security. I predicted that would fail quite badly, and you wouldn't really get much action from that. And early on, the warning signs were there because not enough progress was being made. And in March, for instance, of 2022, it was still kind of like implementing the intent of Congress. And progress was very, very slow, and it didn't get its director, I think, until the summer. Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. So it was very, very slow progress, something which seemed to really baffle the mind, because if you've got these unknown craft,
right,
including ones of extraordinary capability, that if they were Chinese, we'd be speaking Mandarin quite soon, then that's urgent. So to see the slow progress of this really got me annoyed. So then what happened was, obviously that report was delayed. It was supposed to be coming out on Halloween, late October, but the deadline was missed, and eventually came out in early January. So it was missed by quite a long shot, which proves that that office wasn't the best office, and there wasn't enough urgency being made, and the report was very, very underwhelming. And the report was released after a new NDAA, which came out and was signed by Biden in December 2022, and that renamed the office officially to AARO, or that had been done previously, but this kind of officially did it, I suppose, from Congress. It's an act of Congress making AARO official, because I don't want to get too much into the minutiae, but it was official from Congress now.
Sure.
And that had new language in as well. So, for instance, there's talk of, and I know you've mentioned this before, special access programs, which may be illegal in terms of the fact that they're supposed to report to chairs of committee what they're doing. But apparently there are UAP ones or UFO ones that are not reporting what they're doing in terms of alleged retrieval programs of vehicles and reverse engineering programs of these things as well.
When you say vehicles, you mean vehicles that are not made by human hands?
Potential alleged off-world vehicles, correct? Yeah, and that came about because the Senate Intelligence Committee had been speaking to whistleblowers about this, which prompted that committee to draft language providing a mechanism for whistleblowers to come forward. So they're able to break their NDAs or an executive order, or the Atomic Energy Act, for example. Anything that's been secret to that, they're allowed to break those. If it is a program that has not been clearly communicated to Congress, and what it has to now do, it now needs to communicate that to the UFO office named AARO, and then AARO will then verify this. Once it's been authenticated and verified, it's then up to Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense for the US, to communicate that information to Congress. When I say Congress, I mean the armed services and intelligence committees, and House leadership as well, and Senate leadership. So yeah, it's pretty big stuff, really. It's a huge cover up, and I mean, we're talking about like church committee scale of things here that you could potentially, if it's true, you know, the bureaucrats within the US have been hiding not only the fact that we're not alone in the universe, but also we've captured the craft as well and been studying it for decades, all under the nose of Congress without their knowledge. And that's huge. That is so big, because if you live in a democratic nation, oversight is key. If you don't have oversight, right, you're not a democracy, because we elect people in power to have oversight of these things so that the correct decisions can be made. So it's a pretty big deal. I mean, if that is proven to be true, and from very, very good sources I know of, and I know that you have sources as well, this does seem to be true to some extent. And there are various discussions happening at the moment in Congress, with testimony apparently being given to not only Congress, but Dr. Sean Patrick of Arrow, that you know, that these things are happening. So it's pretty big blockbuster stuff. So that's what the new National Defense Authorization Act has provided for. So yeah, it's pretty big stuff. But one of the most important things in terms of the National Defense Authorization Act was to take this UFO office out of the hands of OUSDINS.
Okay.
Which was always an office, which was supposed to be a problem, because the whistleblower Lue Elizondo, who came out about this, saying that we've got a big problem here in terms of UFOs, who came out to the New York Times in 2017 to break the story wide open, that used to be his old office, and various people who have been advocating for UFO transparency have always pointed towards this office as, you know, obfuscating what's really been happening, and kind of like wanting to keep this quiet and trying to hide the truth. So it was very, very important it got taken out of OUSDINS. So that's now under the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Captain Hicks.
So yeah, sorry to interrupt. So one of the things that I've always heard is that in the DoD, Department of Defense, you essentially have two camps. You have one camp that, as Lue Elizondo so eloquently put it, believes that the reality that we are being visited and interacted with by non-human intelligence is like having vegetables in the refrigerators in your refrigerator that's spoiled, it's gone rotten, and leaving it in the refrigerator isn't going to make it any better, nor is it going to make it go away. So you've got that camp that says, you know what, it's time to level with the American public, level with the entire world, that these things that are some kind of non-human intelligence are here and have been here for a very long time. But then you've got the other side of the DoD's mouth that doesn't want to let this news out. I'm guessing it has to do with or largely has to do with UFO crash retrievals, but it's like the Pentagon talks out of both sides of their mouth. It's you would have not Lloyd Austin, but Ronald Moultrie testifying in front of Congress, saying, "Oh yeah, we're all for as much transparency as we can give without revealing sources and methods." But then on the other side of their mouth, they're saying, and they're doing whatever they can. The group that wants to keep all of this shit quiet. They're doing everything that they can to do just that, to try and put the cat back in the bottle. So would you agree with that analysis? And what have your sources said essentially the same thing?
Correct, yes. So I will give you a good demonstration of this. So when the UFO report was supposed to be released back in October, there was a New York Times article, as you remember, from Julian Barnes, where his sources attempt to just kind of like poo-poo UFOs as being like Chinese surveillance and whatnot. And look, some of them may be that, but it really played down the unusual aspects of some UAP which has been cited. And immediately after that story, my colleague at the Daily Mail, he spoke to a source from ODNI who basically said, "Look, this is ridiculous. That they can't explain some of these things. I mean, you've got, orbs seen in the Middle East just bolt off, and you've got, UFOs going into the water without creating a splash. You've got some really, really crazy stuff, and they don't know what to do with this, and they don't want it going out, and they want to basically downplay it as much as possible." So there is like a real kind of like civil war within the Pentagon, and it's very, very frustrating because, I mean, as an outsider, you do see attempts to downplay unusual flight characteristics as much as possible. You could be talking about, as we said, going, 10,000 miles or 20,000 miles, 30,000 miles per hour, and stopping on a dime and turning the other way. And, they just say unusual flight characteristics. And
most people don't know what that means, unusual flight characteristics. Sorry, go on ahead. Didn't mean to interrupt.
It's all, yeah, no, you're correct. It's all terminology. So, I mean, that's where it's really, really playing out. You've got one side just trying to downplay this as much as possible, and you've got the other side just like, look, you can't downplay it. You're not being honest with the people. You have to. We can't explain this.
Yeah, I think in what you touched on earlier, as far as we live in a democracy, and if you have essentially a rogue element of government that is doing everything that they can, most of it, in my view, has probably been illegal, to hide this from Congress, to hide these programs, these UFO programs from Congress. And I know we're kind of jumping around a bit, for the non-UFO viewer, but one of the things that I understood is that prior to all of this legislation happening, Congress found out that the Pentagon had been hiding all of this stuff, and that people in the know, maybe contractors, people in the military, were privately briefing these senators and congressmen and saying, look, this is what we're encountering these things all the time. The DoD has been running a crash retrieval program for decades. And oh, by the way, if the government has a crash retrieval program, that means they're retrieving crashes. You don't have a crash retrieval program if nothing is crashing. So it's almost in a way like a shell game. But anyway, I'm kind of jumping around a bit. But yeah, so Congress essentially, they found all of this out. They realized that the Pentagon had been lying to Congress and the American public, and so these legal mechanisms that Congress put into place was sort of a way to wrestle the truth out of the DoD and and the intelligence community, the IC as well. But it sure seems like these guys are really kicking and screaming, doing everything they can to keep this to keep this Pandora's box from opening. Which guess what? It's already open.
Yeah, the toothpaste is already out the tube. If you look at it that way, I mean, there's so many people who are already coming forward to Congress, and undoubtedly that will translate into coming out in public as well. So yeah, I mean, it's too late now from where I see it. Stuff is coming out whether they like it or not. But it's concerning. I mean, you pointed on something there, and I kind of touched upon it about overtly stating it, is that you got like one side which is like it could be like naval pilot, or naval aviators, sailors, pilots who are seeing these things, and they don't know what they are. And you even have like a lot of people within an IC probably feel like that as well. We don't know what these things are. And then on the other side, you might have a group of insiders who are privy to these special access programs dealing with crash retrievals and reverse engineering programs, who know exactly what these things are,
right?
Which is a huge problem. And and then you've got the other side as well. Look, these things, even if like, even if 2 out of 10 is a Chinese drone or surveillance ship, if you guys go to war with China over Taiwan, I mean, you guys, if you're not looking into UFOs and you're not on top of this, I mean, that could cause major problems as well. If you're not identifying what's coming into your airspace, it could be, some, UFO which is going to cause a direct threat, and you might just mistake that as being, you might mistake it, and it could be like a Chinese drone or airship or something like that, which could be very, very harmful to you. So yeah, it's very important, and I feel as if this Chinese balloon story is so important because now it sets the bar that this is an urgent problem. So, if it's a problem that this thing's been going over the US mainland, perhaps you want to start looking at some other more extraordinary UFOs which have reportedly been, seen over US nuclear installations, been harassing US naval warships on a frequent basis, and being seen every day basically on the East Coast by pilots, and no one seems to be doing anything about it. So if you want urgency, I mean, that's something you've got to get on top of, especially if it is Chinese. Look, I'm not saying they are Chinese, but no one's traced an origin since they've been seen, and no one's been able to identify them, despite these things being seen for years on a daily basis on the East Coast.
Right.
But you have to, because let's say if I'm Chinese, I think there's UFOs off the East Coast, and I know for a fact that they're extraterrestrial, whatever. Well, from a practical standpoint, what I'll probably do is I'll probably try to mimic those characteristics that they have with a balloon or something like that, and I'll put it on the East Coast where they've seen these UFOs, because I know that they're not going to do anything about it. And
right.
It's these practical things you have to think about as well. So that's how you have to approach it from pragmatically, really, just in terms of UFOs.
So going back to the whole drone thing, I think there are a couple of points to consider. Number one, the reports from our military describing these vehicles. This goes all the way back to World War II, and back World War II, jet propulsion didn't even exist, and certainly China and Russia did not have jet propulsion or anything that could have possibly produced a vehicle that our members of our militaries are seeing all the time. So, when was it, like the late '60s, early '70s? I don't have the dates right, but Project Blue Book, which was a sort of investigation that the U.S. Air Force ran, essentially said that there's nothing to see here. All of this is just swamp gas or seeing Venus or whatever. What I wonder is particularly in this last UAP report, which I could have written. It's so freaking simple. I mean, it was kind of a lot like my book reports in middle school, which I would get a D- on. It was really pretty bad. But it kind of seems like the mechanism that the DoD is trying to explain away a lot of this is, it's just drones, it's just a balloon. It almost seems as if it's kind of their sort of modern version of swamp gas and Venus. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Mostly, I mean, it's a very, very basic report. I mean, you want to have a look at Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick's presentation notes, which he did, I think, in the same week as the UFO report was released, because he did a presentation to like an aviation conference when the report was released, and that presentation had a lot more kind of details on it than a report which has taken months apparently to produce. And I mean, that report was basically saying that UFOs are a worldwide issue. It's not just a US problem, and everyone's encountering them. Even China is encountering UFOs on a regular basis, as all countries are. So yeah, but all I can say is that things are going to change. Congress knows what's going on now, and they're quite wise to it. And I'm very, very optimistic for the UFO office, Arrow, now that it's out of the OUSDINS. So I think, despite our disappointment, I expect things to move forward in the coming months or weeks and months. So yeah, that's what I'd say for those who feel disheartened about the current situation.
Have you, through your contacts in in the United States political system, are you hearing anything from your sources regarding the UAP crash retrieval programs? Are you hearing that yes, they are indeed real, or this is just drummed up fiction? What are you hearing from your sources here in the U.S.?
I'm hearing that they are real and this stuff does exist and they've been verified. I reported that back in August and it was backed up by George Knapp as well, who has many, many sources. A legendary journalist as is George Knapp, the one who broke the Lazar story. So he backed that up as well as various other people have. These things have apparently been verified by Congress. Look, the Senate Intelligence Committee doesn't willy-nilly go drafting language about, secret, illegal, potentially illegal UFO programs and whistleblower language without good reason. Without good reason. So I believe that, I believe that they do exist, and they may have gone back from some time. I mean, there's rumors of an alleged UFO crash in 1933 in Italy when Mussolini was leader. And
Wow.
there's a bunch of telegrams that have been released from El Duce, as they called him. I think it was El Duce. I hope I haven't got that wrong. Sorry, Italians. And it was about like a crash of a foreign aircraft. And I spoke to some of my Italian sources, and they say that at first the Italians thought it was German technology because apparently there were like two Nordic-looking people who were recovered from that craft.
Wow.
And that's quite an interesting story. They didn't know what it was at first, and then
Sure. Yeah.
they knew it wasn't China, no, nor was it
Right.
the
Right.
moon. And they soon discovered it wasn't German. It was something a lot more extraordinary, apparently. And they set up like a study program with Marconi as part of it, the famous inventor of the radio, of course. And the story is that after World War II, that was taken to the United States, and there are two people unconnected, one a French biologist and a US Air Force officer called William Brophy, who both claim that at Wright Patterson Air Force Base there were two bodies of Nordic-looking um, beings that say look like twins, allegedly, apparently from that crash from 1933 in Italy. So
And
that's
what?
interesting. I mean,
And I'm
just
sorry.
legend.
Sorry to interrupt. What year again was this? I've never heard of this.
1933, this thing allegedly crashed in Italy.
33.
Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
when it comes to information, look, I like to entertain this information. I don't judge it. I see it as potential information, but I
Right.
keep it in the back of my mind because if another piece of the puzzle comes and I can connect those things to verify it, that's very, very important to have. But I find that quite compelling. And I mean, obviously, I think when nuclear technology was invented, there was an uptick of these things because then all of a sudden these gorillas in a cage, which is humanity, suddenly discover the keys to this cage,
Right.
nuclear technology to get out of the Earth and potentially get out of our solar system. So that was very, very crucial. And then obviously you had the crashes as well that occurred. So yeah, it's all very, very interesting, and there's a lot of puzzle to put together. I mean, there's one train of thought that says that these alleged crashes happen for a reason, so that we get technology, and China will have a crash, we'll have a crash, whether the United States will, and then they'll get more technology, and then they'll pit them off against each other, basically, because they like conflict so that mankind can be distracted so they can do other things. I mean,
Wow.
that's one train of thought. Obviously, it's a bit woo. Sorry, I had to put that out there.
Sure, yeah,
I mean, you've got also people claiming that it's electromagnetic pulses, which obviously derived from nuclear explosions that could take them down as well. I've heard that from some very, very good sources that that's the case. So there's lots of theories and there's lots of ways in which they could potentially crash. So it's it's very, very interesting, and there's a lot of history behind it. Pre-China being the power it is today. And look, when this stuff was being investigated in the 1950s and 60s, China was going through a drought.
right.
And we've got the same characteristics reported now as we do back in the 60s when it comes to the unusual cases. So that's why it's very, very important as a journalist to focus on the unusual performance characteristics of UAP, not the ones that can be easily explainable. And look, like if we do get it wrong, if we focus on a particular case, we'll correct it as well, because that integrity is important, which was the case in Wisconsin. Probably wasn't UFOs. We reported on the Wisconsin story back in December, some lights over Wisconsin, and it seemed to be a very good probability that they were just normal lights, which managed to travel very, very far due to some kind of like weather anomaly or something like that, which is interesting nonetheless. But it's very, very important that we go into this subject without an ego and being humble, and we just want to get the facts out, And if we do have further questions which are important to ask, we should ask those questions as well. I mean, that's what it's all about, really, keeping honest.
So that's one of my problems with the, with some of these debunkers like Mick West, is he kind of oversimplifies these things and completely poo-poos the human witness element. For instance, people go in and testify in court that this happened. They didn't have sensor data or satellite data that they could look at, but this particular thing happened, and testimony like that puts people in jail. It's that sort of thing is if it's solid testimony is admitted into a court of law. It was interesting. I watched this interview that Mick did with Lue Elizondo, and so Lue was kind of explaining the whole Tic Tac incident, and Mick was putting out his sort of debunking theories, and essentially what Mick said is if I can see the sensor data, then that'll sort it. Well, all of that, Mick West and Green Street, whoever the basement boy guy, they're running a fool's errand. In other words, they are asking for proof that they know they will never get. For instance, any government, especially United States government, isn't going to show us satellite data. We are not going to see unscrubbed radar data. So these guys know this, and it's part of this sort of mental game that they play. So, but it was interesting in that interview because, and I'd have to go back and watch it, but essentially Lue, I forgot what he said, but he pretty much debunked Mick's argument, and then Mick right away changed the subject. He's like, we're running out of time, and then he completely goes on to the next question because he knew Lue completely had him. And it's just interesting that sometimes I wonder if these guys are on someone's payroll because they spend so much time, so much energy, but these guys, they will just go and obsess on one little thing. They'll simplify the argument, and because they have, because they have a voice, because they have a following, someone like, video game developer Mick West will just say, this is it, end of story. He won't do any in-depth analysis. He won't, I mean, just, yeah, I know I'm going on a bit of a rant, but it's the debunking community, instead of saying, yeah, let's look into this, or let's see what these other witnesses say, they immediately jump to the negative. They immediately do whatever they can to stop the conversation, either through sort of completely horrible analysis, or really moreover what Dr. Gary Nolan has pointed out several times. What they do is a form of shame. So in other words, when Gary Nolan pointed this out, it's like when you're a kid and you do something wrong, that's what your parents say to you, shame on you. You know, you should be ashamed you did this. So you have Dick West and Greenstreet that regularly engage in that kind of behavior, so to speak. So if you're someone that saw something, and you know that you saw something, but you have these guys that make you ashamed to talk about it, it does nothing but inhibit what we should all be doing, which is looking into this subject in a very unbiased manner, because they are completely biased. They completely have an agenda.
I mean,
sorry, I know a bit on a ramp. It went on a bit of a ramp there. A rant, not a ramp.
That's okay. I always like to look at. I like to see the best in people as much as I can, you know. And I think there's just. I mean, firstly, you do have this field does attract some disturbed individuals. You know, I receive some horrible comments about my family and stuff, you know. But that's unfortunately what you have to get yourself into when it comes to this stuff. And I think you also just get a lot of people who are just very, very frustrated as well, and they want to know the answers. You know, it's not good enough for them that the census systems are classified, and and they're just desperate for the answers. So it's easy for them just to attack people instead, you know, and make their own conclusions. And unfortunately, the devil is in the detail when it comes to these things. I think the hearing mentioned that Lue was AATIP as well. And if you speak to Susan Goff, the public affairs spokesperson for the Pentagon, she will say to you that Lue Elizondo didn't have any assigned responsibilities with AATIP. However, if you ask her if he had any unassigned responsibilities, because remember, his supervisor did not know about this, wouldn't assign duties, was very, very unhappy with him that he'd been doing this that Lue had been doing this about his knowledge, which I find quite funny. And I mean, they can't answer that, you know, that they hide behind language and qualifiers and stuff like that. But if you do go into the details, did Lue Elizondo have any any unallocated kind of unassigned responsibilities of AATIP? Obviously, the answer would be yes, he did have responsibilities with AATIP, and I just find it very, very misleading that they use some kind of language. I mean, you guys in the US, your taxpayer money is going to this, you know, like hiding behind language. You know, they could simply just say, look, he had responsibilities of AATIP, correct? Those responsibilities were not assigned by a supervisor. I mean, that'd be a better response.
Right.
And less misleading. And I just feel that the Pentagon's been weaponized against Lue Elizondo. And I had to launch a complaint to the Pentagon's Public Affairs Office because they wouldn't even confirm to me that he was working for Space Force in the summer, last summer. He was with Space Force, and that they didn't answer me, and other people had been in touch with them, they weren't answering them either. So I had to literally launch a complaint to get information from them to confirm that he was working for Space Force. And I mean, that tells me that this is being weaponized by the DoD against Lue, which is very frustrating to him and his family, I can imagine. I mean, at the end of the day, like, I get the feeling that they just didn't want to confirm that because that mean that Lue still had his clearance.
Right.
And he was working on, sensitive topics for the Space Watch, which was also confirmed. So if he was a liar, like many claim, and something which is kind of like put out there by the Pentagon statements on him,
Right.
he wouldn't be able to, he wouldn't be able to get even close to, working on sensitive topics which are classified by the Space Force. I mean, yeah,
Right.
it's just something which is inconvenient for them, and it shouldn't be like that. You shouldn't just ignore the questions and not want to answer questions that are inconvenient to you as a public affairs officer and the Pentagon in general, because otherwise you've been weaponized basically against an individual because you're trying to hide information, which is really bad. It's not good for transparency with the public in general.
Right. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I mean, it's not good for transparency, and all it does is fester more and more distrust. Yeah. One of the things I think that has just blown me away is, I remember Lue Elizondo talking about this. The amount of abuse that these folks get. Lue Elizondo. I'm not sure about Christopher Mellon, how much grief he's received, but all of these folks, that really got us to where we are. George Knapp, Robert Hastings, Bob Salas, all of these folks, and of course Lue Elizondo, that really put their asses on the line at a time when there was so much stigma that it was just a Herculean effort that these guys did what they did, and we owe them such a debt of gratitude. But I think that is the thing that really I think is disappointing, is seeing the amount of sort of going after the credibility of people. And I think you had mentioned something earlier. You've even received personal insults regarding your family, and I know even like with Lue Elizondo, there was some guy that doxed his family and his kids, and you just have to wonder what is wrong with people, and it makes you respect all the more that people like yourself, Lue, and these other folks are taking those arrows for the greater good, because they know somebody has got to move this conversation forward.
Yeah, that's correct, and it must hurt a lot more for Lue because it's the Pentagon discredited him as well, and he's given up everything for this cause. He left his job for it basically, and gave up like a pension, and didn't have a place to live for a very long time, a proper home. So it really hurts for him. But I think when I first started out doing this, it really used to get to me, and I used to be very emotional. But I think after a while, you've only got a certain amount of bandwidth, and
right.
I have to spend that bandwidth either working and pushing the ball forward, or spending it with my family and just trying to be happy, because I don't know how some people can be happy just spending their time on Twitter all the time and being insulting to people. It's not the way that you gain happiness, and there are better ways to disagree with someone. That's just my personal thoughts anyway,
Sure.
In terms of it. But, I just try to find things that make me happy in life and not focus too much on the negatives. Being through a lot. I write a lot because I'm not a very good speaker. I got primary.
I disagree.
Education. It slows down my thoughts and my thinking and my speech pattern slow down and stuff. So it's just I never planned to be a public figure. I think at first when I started my career, I wasn't going to have a career because I couldn't write. I couldn't do any linguistic activity for like over 20 minutes. So I couldn't work until I got medication for a rare form of epilepsy, which hardly anyone knows exists. So so I've been through a lot in my life, so I can be quite thankful for what I have, in life in general. So I prefer to focus on those things and focus on my son and my wife, and yeah, those things make me happy. I
Yeah.
think everyone is genuine advice. I think people should just try to seek those things out in everyday life that make them happy. So
Keep calm,
my dad's
and carry on. So yeah. So speaking of your writing, so let's talk about your recent article. So in that you put in the Liberation Times, it's titled "UFOs Harassed U.S. Warships in 2019, and New Eyewitnesses Contradict Pentagon's UAS," which we'll have to ask you what UAS means. UAS label, whilst claiming one object shot down a beam of light which turned the night sky into bright as day. And this was, if I understand right, this story is based on Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp's new podcast. So tell us a bit about this article, about this incident.
Right, yeah. So with the help of Jeremy and George, we're able to get some more information that was contained in the episode to kind of build these events out a little bit more as well. But yeah, what happened was there was a swarm of objects which harassed U.S. Navy warships in July 2019, over the period of I think within 15 days, of 4 nights within 15-day period off the West Coast. And Jeremy Corbell released some video of that, showing some pyramids, like objects, which were described in an intelligence briefing that we got it from this triangular from how they were observed, from angle of observation. And there were some others as well. One included a sphere type object filmed. I think it was from the USS Omaha, and it submerged under the water after hovering for a long time. They launched some submarines. They couldn't find anything. So there was that story, and I think it shocked the world. And then you had Mick West basically said, "Oh, it's bokeh. That's why it's triangular.
Right.
It's not really a pyramid." I mean,
of course.
To be honest, someone once said, even if it was bokeh, if it was triangular shaped, it would still be triangular shaped. That wouldn't change it.
Right, exactly, yeah. It's pretty easy, yeah.
But yeah, and then obviously you had some journalists basically doing some FOIAs and saying, oh, look, these things were unmanned aerial systems, that's drones, that's how they're catalogued as. And then at the UFO hearing held in May, Bray from the Navy, one of the top intelligence guys from the Navy, US Navy, basically said, "Oh yeah, they're drones."
It's drones, right? It's Seagulls.
Correct. Yes, and then the Pentagon, Susan Goff, basically said to me that they were seen as UAS, unmanned aerial systems, from initial analysis, and now we've evaluated that. And they are definitely UAS, unmanned aerial systems, and there was a theory that then went on that they came from the Bass Strait, which is a Hong Kong registered ship. So all of a sudden it became, oh, these are Chinese drones. And even if you look on the Wikipedia page for, I think it was Pacific Basin, who basically owns that ship, it basically states the fact that these things came from the Bass Strait, and this all came from these FOIA requests.
Okay.
The only thing they're missing is actually talking to the witnesses.
Right.
And those
sounds like some of our debunkers.
Exactly. And you can go along and you can say, yeah, they're drones, they're unmanned aerial systems, whatever, and they came from the Bass Strait.
Right.
That fits absolutely perfectly. It's a perfect story. Only if you ignore the witnesses, though, and the ones who actually made the designations as them being drones or UAS.
Maybe the Pentagon is taking analysis lessons from Mick West. It sounds like just don't talk to anybody.
Exactly. So those who actually made the designation, looking back at it, say that actually we had to go by our best interpretation at the time, and they were too small to kind of be like an aircraft where someone could man the aircraft. So they were small enough that we thought, okay, we'll designate them as drones and um, UAS. But actually, thinking about it now, if we had to designate them, they'd be UAP because they had some strange flight characteristics. They weren't from the Bass Strait. But the witnesses basically said, look, we observed the Bass Strait. And we never saw anything launch from the Bass Strait. We never saw anything land on the Bass Strait, despite it being constantly observed. You can hear the frustration. I mean, they wanted to desperately say that it came from the Bass Strait. They wanted an answer because they were getting frustrated, but they couldn't. And sources have also told me that ship was also searched, and they found nothing. So yeah, it's stranger than one might think. These things were coming in from the west. And there's nothing out at west unless it came from Hawaii, but that's like thousands of nautical miles away. And then, so that's where they would come from. And sometimes they seem to just appear from nowhere and then disappear. Like they went into the water as that sphere was filmed. And when they were actually going away, in many cases they were going away in different bearings from where they were coming from, which is not like a drone behaves. And these witnesses from the warships, they've been on deployment various times and they've seen Chinese drones and various adversarial drones and allied drones as well. So very, very, they knew what drones were. And many of those people were like, look, we don't think they were drones. They were hovering around the ships, just like going up into a burst without making any sound. And most alarmingly, that one seemed to illuminate the whole of the USS Paul Hamilton, one of the naval ships, with a bright white beam that lasted 2 seconds, which kind of really jarred the witness. And we subsequently found out as well that there had been a similar event that happened on the USS Kearsarge, if I pronounce that correctly, which is like a helicopter carrier, marine ship that carries Marines. And it's very, very big. I mean, it's after the aircraft carriers, it's the largest ships you have. And this ship was out on deployment, and the crew saw this object coming towards, which was lit up, disappeared, and came closer, and it shot down a green beam, this bright beam, wow. And it disorientated the sailors on the bridge. It lasted 8 seconds, and one of the witnesses, one of the sailors, put her hands in front of her eyes. And wow. She said that it was so bright she couldn't even see her hands. So that is like a really, really remarkable story. And it just seems that it's unexplained, basically. And, let's go with firstly, we don't think this is China or anyone like that, because we don't know where they're coming from. Right. And these capabilities, not only can they hover for hours, but also they can shine down bright beams as well. I mean, where are they getting their battery power from?
Yeah, you're not going to get that on a DJI drone. That's for sure.
Correct. Yeah, and I think the concern is here, if you are going to play devil's advocate, let's say if it was an adversarial technology, that's kind of like you disorientate the crew of a warship. I mean, that's basically them out of action for 8 seconds while they're dealing with this bright light. And you can go and attack them for that time. So, I mean, this is a really, really serious issue here. Right. I mean, this goes beyond science fiction. I mean, this is real life consequences here. Right. For sailors. So, yeah. I credit these remarkable witnesses for coming forward, because it's not even clear at this point that Congress was aware of these witnesses. Really? Wow. So okay, yeah. so rewinding a bit, because the Moultrie and Bray, they spoke about this incident. They testified in front of Congress about this, correct? That's correct, yeah. And I would think if they're doing their jobs, they are well aware of these witness accounts. I mean, there's absolutely no way that that this occurred and witness testimonies weren't taken on the ship. So my question would be,
why didn't they mention any of this while they were testifying under oath in front of Congress? I mean, obviously, it's conjecture as to why not, but that's pretty remarkable that they would not tell Congress this, which to me seems a pretty blatant case of what is Moultrie's title of what is his title again?
He's the director of the office. He's the undersecretary. Sorry, he's the undersecretary.
Office of OUSDI or something.
Yeah, undersecretary. The office of is the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security. Sorry.
Right. Yeah. So this guy is, I can't imagine, is not aware of this testimony. So in my view, that's clearly like misleading Congress, and I mean, it's just this gets into this whole thing that we talked about earlier about they're like, oh yeah, we're going to be completely transparent, but oh, by the way, I'm not going to tell Congress about this shit ton of testimony about all this crazy stuff that happened that clearly was not a Chinese drone. I mean, come on. Anyway, I don't mean to interrupt.
There's two ways to think about that. Either, the US has discovered some Chinese technology which is remarkable, and it's confident about this, which is why Susan Goss from the Pentagon said to me that they had evaluated it and subsequently found it to be UAS. Either that has happened, or there's another possibility that they're just playing around with the terminology. They're like, okay,
right.
Anything small enough can be designated a drone now, so we can evaluate it as being that. But I think they're in a bit of a bind perhaps at the moment, because the initial assessment of them being UAS/drones was done through the witness testimony, and those who designated them as being drones and UAS at the time.
Wow.
Well, now guess what? These same people were saying, actually, looking back at it, would have to say these things were UAP. So this is kind of like contradicted their whole messaging. So unless the Pentagon had conclusive proof that these were UAS, then there's a big problem. And also, I don't think they've managed to capture these things as well, because they tried to shoot them down on 2 occasions. The crews did.
Wow.
And they couldn't take them down using their anti-drone technology. So.
And what is this? What is this anti-drone technology? It's kind of the first I've heard of this. Or what do you know? Or what can you say about it? Or what do you know about it?
So it's kind of, from my understanding, it's kind of like electronic warfare. It's kind of like I won't go into technicalities out of fear of embarrassing myself, but
from my understanding, I don't know about it either.
Called like Ghostbusters, something like that. I think.
Right, but
electronic warfare things. But
what I did, but it didn't work.
So what I will say is that I mean, these people, they feel like they failed because they couldn't get them down.
Wow.
Look, I have a video of like a drone being shot down at night in the ocean, which was sent out by environmental activists or something like that. When people were smuggling illegal stuff out in the ocean, and these people on the boat basically managed to shoot down the drone at night with a gun.
Wow.
So it's not that hard.
Right. That's crazy. And so you speak in the article about Commander John Gutierrez. I mean, that's really kind of because this guy's he's an active duty naval aviator, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
So that's quite a big deal that he's. And I watched a bit of his interview on Corbell and Knapp's podcast, which, by the way, I recommend to anyone that's interested in this subject. They're sort of the OGs of this whole UFO thing. But I mean, that's a really big deal. I would imagine this guy hasn't received any sort of official sanctioning from the Pentagon to go out and talk about this. So this is a really pretty big deal that he's talking about this to the extent that he is.
Yeah, I mean, I won't go into the detail or anything like that in terms of like, did the Pentagon say this or did the Pentagon say he was allowed to do that? But I mean, purely he's going on that show and just giving his personal opinion. So he made it very, very clear that he's not representing anyone. So that's been made very, very clear. But I think that he provided a lot of insight at the same time. I think in terms of this, and I think once a lot of other people retire and they're not in service anymore, you're going to get a lot more people come forward to start speaking about this as well, which he kind of like alluded to, I think, from the interview. So, but yeah, that's really, really big. I mean, he's an active kind of like naval commander. So
that's amazing. Because I think one of the things that he was pointing out is that these encounters are a safety of flight issue. This is endangering our naval aviators, right?
That's correct. I mean, that's one of his big things in terms of flight safety, and that's one of the major concerns regarding UAP in terms of potentially causing fatalities.
Gotcha. Yeah. So okay. So I have to admit, I've been watching that clock that's right behind you there, and if I'm reading it correctly, it's approximately 8 minutes until 1 a.m. So I'm not going to keep you here much longer. Final couple of questions. What do you think is next? What if you were a betting man? What do you think in terms of the whole UAP disclosure effort? What would you guess is coming around the corner if you were to guess?
If I was to guess, I mean, I think the mood from inside of those advocating things, they seem very, very bullish at the moment. I do know that there has been testimony given by apparent whistleblowers relating to illegal programs relating to UAP crash retrievals and reverse engineering programs. So that's really, really big. But in terms of predictions, I'm not so great on that. I mean, I think let's just give like a best case scenario of what I'd like to happen.
Yeah.
So firstly, I'd say is that I think things are going to go well with Arrow. I think despite some reservations about Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, I think now that office is outside OUSDINS, I think we can be a lot more optimistic in terms of progress made. So that's great.
That's great. Yeah.
The international dimension is very, very important as well. I think we're going to move forward in terms of the international effort. Maybe more countries will join the club, which is great in terms of talking about this. And we've got the UN disclosure effort as well, which will come to a head, I think, September perhaps.
Okay.
Marina is taking this before the United Nations. That's huge, by the way. And the origin of that goes back to China as well.
Say that. I'm sorry, I missed that last part. It goes back to China? Sorry, repeat that. What do you mean?
UN disclosure effort goes back to China. It originates in China.
Yeah, oh, wow. Okay.
The people involved in this effort were part of a group called ISA, and it's like a group, like it's an acronym of some sort. I can't remember what it's.
Right. Yeah. I can never remember these.
Correct. Yeah, and I think so. The main people within ISA, they all came together because the Chinese got them together because the Chinese held two symposiums, one in China. In one of these cities in China, I can't remember which one it was again now, and another in Moscow. It was like a joint kind of like Russian and Chinese thing, but led by the Chinese, and it was to like bring people from all around the world to talk about UFOs. They had representatives from different countries who went on to form ISA, and I think the plan from the Chinese was to kind of like eventually bring this about for the United Nations as well. So these were huge events. You can see the videos on YouTube. And what happened was there was supposed to be a third symposium, and no one ever heard back about it. And that third symposium was going to be about going to the United Nations and preparing for all this stuff, and the Chinese just disappeared. So, sorry, I digress.
Yeah, no, it's all good.
So I think we're going to make good progress. I did hear that once the National Defense Authorization language was passed with the whistleblower language, that there were going to be hearings. I'm still hopeful that there will be hearings. I think that at some point, once Congress does have enough information to gain access to these alleged illegal special access programs, once they're satisfied that they've got enough information, a big decision will have to be made. Do they disclose this to the American public? And the bind that the Pentagon may be in and the US government may be in is the fact that other countries may have access to retrieve craft as well, like China. And look, China can probably get about, it could probably get like about 100,000 engineers and scientists to probably look into this stuff and study it, en masse, and keep it a secret as well. It could conceivably do that. Whereas the US, from my understanding, it's all compartmentalized. It's one or two scientists working here, one or two scientists working there. If they get stuck, they can't phone a friend. So I think it's very much within the interests of the US government and apparent corporations involved as well, like Lockheed, for instance, which may be involved, to actually make this public. If you make this public, then you can make more progress.
Right.
And also you can, you can prolong life, you can you can solve energy problems potentially. I mean, it would be like an Apollo program, an age of discovery that you can go on, and so much progress could be made by making this public. And you would also attract the best talent as well, because at the moment, if you're an engineer and you're going for a job, I mean, you'd have to say that it might be SpaceX that you would go for. If you were the best graduate from your university and you're an engineer, you might go to SpaceX because that's a lot more sexier and you know what they're doing. And you know that Lockheed is studying this stuff, but now that you're aware that Lockheed has a UFO program, no, you're not going to go to SpaceX anymore. You're going to go to Lockheed. So I think it's in the best interest of one, from a pragmatic perspective, to eventually make any of these programs public knowledge, because if these things conceivably do exist and China is studying them en masse, which it could potentially do, then that's a huge concern, because whoever masters this tech first kind of like dominates the world for a very long time. And by the way, I just want to make sure it comes across that I'm very, very anti-Chinese, but I've got Chinese friends.
Sure, as do I, of course.
Lovely people, and obviously a dictatorship does not represent everyday Chinese people, and they're lovely. A lot of them are. So 100%. Apologies across that way.
Right? No, not at all. I completely I feel the exact same way. But I think that's a very good point, because this technology is not even next generation technology. It's a 1,000-year, if not longer jump in technology, and it would be who of democratic governments to be the first to figure this out. You don't want the government of China or the government of Russia to be the first to figure all of it out. So they have these recovered craft. I've heard the exact same thing from very high sources. This isn't fiction. It's this is science fact. And so if the United States government in particular has so much stovepiping, so much compartmentalization, that it's hurting the progress of us being able to back engineer this stuff. It hurts us as a country. It hurts national security for all freedom-loving countries such as UK and us. So I really think that's a very good point that you hit on. It's time to let this stuff out. And the other thing that I have heard from other people too is that people involved with this kind of stuff is that a lot of this is about money. So if you're a Lockheed Martin that sells 500 bombers per year to various countries, and you have this technology squirreled away that you could produce a bomber implementing this technology, let's say, and each country would only need one of these things. You know, you go from selling 500 widgets down to a few widgets. So in many ways, it doesn't make any business sense for them. But in the larger good, they're really shooting themselves and this country and others in the foot by hoarding this technology. I think someone had sort of made the comparison to Gollum, you know, my precious. And that's one of the other things that I've heard as well from many sources is that all of this stuff has been squirreled away and hidden by very small elements in the government, you know, the Pentagon, the intelligence community, the small group of individuals that sort of fetishizes the knowledge of this, and they want to keep it to themselves for many reasons. And one of the things that I've heard is these individuals that are the gatekeepers of this technology and this program is there's also financial incentives for these individuals to keep this to themselves. It goes back to this whole military-industrial complex, which oftentimes does not serve the greater good, or not maybe oftentimes, all the time doesn't serve the greater good of humanity.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, it's very, very interesting, and there's a big web to untangle here in terms of this.
Right.
But look, I mean, I don't know what I don't know at the end of the day, and it seems to me that this is a very, very complex thing, and it's going to go into a lot of these corporations and these companies, some that may have been disbanded now, like EG&G, for instance, that used to run Area 51.
Right.
A bunch of other big organizations as well, and then you had like a big organization, private sector organization, I think so, that bought that out. And I don't know. I think if you're going to hide something, you hide them in private companies,
hide it in plain sight.
Yeah, not just aerospace companies. You would hold them in various, like you could hold them in, like you could fund them through hedge funds. It could all be off the books and stuff like that.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's the first I've heard of that. Wow, that's I bet it makes total sense.
Well, I got that from Secret Machines by Tom DeLonge. It just seems to me.
I'm reading
like
one of his books, by the way. Yeah, it's cool stuff.
Yeah, it was like a hedge fund of some sort. It was like a corporation, and
wow,
it was like doing all these programs and stuff, and you did it off the books, like a reverse engineering program or something like that. I mean, that just makes perfect sense. If you want to hide something, you properly hide it. You don't call it UFO program.
Right.
It's UFO corporation, and we got the UFO program. You would call it something totally different, and you'd make sure that it was very, very well hidden through verbiage and bureaucratic terms and stuff like that. And
right.
Yeah, it's all interesting. Sorry, this is speculation right now.
For sure.
How you could hide.
Well, so I see that it's 105 behind you, and I would imagine the last thing I want to do is for your wife to say, "Don't ever come back on that Good Trouble show. That guy's going to keep you out far too late." So we'll end it there. We really, Chris, really appreciate your time. You're definitely a friend of the show. You and I have the pleasure of visiting with you offline, and it's I can say it's really great to call you a friend. And again, my hat is really off to you for the true hard work that you are doing in journalism on this, while the rest of the journalistic world, or I would say most of the journalistic world, there are other journalists like yourself, that a couple that come to mind that are doing truly great work. But yeah, man, you're doing really great work. I truly believe when all of this is settled, as much as it can be settled, you're going to go down in history as one of the groundbreaking journalists that really really did the right thing. So finally, how can tell us where people can find your work and how they can find you online?
Yeah. Just go to, if you want to see my website, it's www.liberationtimes.com, all one word, no space or anything. And you can also find me on Twitter as well. So I'm on Twitter, so Liberation Times is like the handle for my Twitter in terms of Liberation Times. And then you can also like find me personally if you find me interesting at all on Twitter as well.
Awesome.
So that is so how do you achieve my address quite recently? So that's at Chris UK Sharp, which is really imaginative because I come from the UK. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Chris, thank you so much for your time and best of luck to you. And I look forward to making a trip out to the UK and meeting you and Vinny and some other new friends out there soon. Chris Sharp, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Cool.